one of my favorite movies that we screened here at Fantasia many years ago was called In a Glass Cage. That has some thematic similarities to Apt Pupil. Have you ever seen that film? Spanish film?
No, I haven't. I've heard of it, but I've never seen it. Night Porter's another one. There's a movie called Baxter, a French movie about a dog, which is very similar to Apt Pupil in a way. It's a very cool movie.
Apt Pupil was the first time you dealt with the Holocaust, and it's a theme you've returned to time and time again in your films. Could you talk about why you like exploring that dark period in human history?
Well, I'm Jewish, and as a Jewish person, you grow up with a very specific understanding of the Holocaust. And I also had a teacher called Miss Viscarelli at my junior high school, and she taught a very comprehensive course on the Holocaust. And an event like that is so overwhelming and incomprehensible, especially to happen in a society so enlightened and evolved as Germany was in the 20s and 30s, that I just became quite fascinated with it. And the Stephen King story told it from a different angle. You know, I don't believe I'm equipped to make a Schindler's List or a pianist at this point in my life, but to be able to touch upon that subject matter in films like Apt Pupil or in the beginning of X-Men, you know, it's interesting. And in Valkyrie, to tell the story from the German resistance point of view. It would be too hard for me emotionally to try to make a film that day in, day out Holocaust. I don't know how Stephen, you know, got through that experience.
Well, and in some ways you were able to reach more people than Spielberg and Polanski did with their films by covering your films.
It's a different way of reaching people with the fantasy films. That's one nice thing about science fiction and fantasy films. They tell stories, if they're done well, they tell stories about the human condition, but from such a fantastical point of view that it lulls you into the entertainment aspect of it and dazzles you. But if you do them right, like a movie like Star Wars, you know, you learn about morality, you know, good, evil, and ambiguity. Or in X-Men, you know, there's a lot of moral ambiguity in the points of view of these villains and heroes.
You initially turned down the original X-Men. You weren't a fan of the comic.
I didn't know the comic. I didn't know the comic, and there was a script that was written that was a bit post-apocalyptic, weird. I didn't quite connect to it. But when I sat down, I studied the character histories, and I met with Stan Lee, and he was so cool, just cool. And he was so cool to me at the meeting. He treated me like I was a god. And I kept, you know, I had made so few movies, so I kept bringing up The Usual Suspects. And in the middle of the meeting, he said, "Why do you keep bringing up that movie?" And I said, that's all I can bring up because I don't have much. I'm sorry, it's just one of the few movies I've made. And he goes, "You made The Usual Suspects? Oh my God!" And I was like, oh my God, this guy, this icon, just has been treating me so nice, and he has no idea who the hell I was. I was like, okay, I better take his X-Men seriously. So I went home that night, and Chris McQuarrie and I went to an acting showcase, and I just, for a friend, an actor friend, that I sadly didn't, I stared at the floor the whole time thinking about, how do I make an X-Men movie? How do I make an X-Men movie? So, and came up with some ideas of how to make it accessible to the non-fans as well as fans.
The head of Fox said the reason why he hired you was because he thought you would avoid overdoing the effects and go for more character development on the original X-Men. Is that your goal on the new film?
Yeah, always. Yeah, it's you know, X-Men films have traditionally had a slightly a different tone. They fall somewhere between a Dark Knight and the Marvel movie. I mean, they're a bit brighter and a bit, you know, but at the same time they're steeped in their themes and their characters, and that's what appeals to me. I like ensemble movies. They knew I was, you know, good at them or decent at them from Usual Suspects, and I just, once I started reading about the character histories, I found his characters so fascinating. I started coming up with all kinds of storylines, many of which had already been explored in the comic. And then I watched all 70 episodes of the animated series, and I found that to be really entertaining. It's a great series.
Did anyone have to twist you around to do X2, or were you on board right from the start?
No, I was on board. Yeah, because X2 was a chance to do a lot of the things we could not afford to do on X1. The budget was very tight on X1, and my release schedule got moved up 6 months, which when you're a young, stupid filmmaker, you think, oh, I guess that doesn't mean anything, and then I'd never made a studio film. I had very unpleasant moments on that movie, freaking out, thinking it was all over, career-wise, so, genuinely. But yeah, we made just enough money to justify the sequel. And the X2, a lot more freedom, some more money, some more time. I could do that Nightcrawler sequence that I wanted to do that, the next one. Stuff like that.
When you first started working with him, Sir Ian McKellen once said you were afraid of actors. Is there any truth to that? And why? Did you say that?
No, I think I'm intimidated by actors. Ethan Hawke, when we were working together as a kid, said something very profound to me I'll never forget. He said, good actors equal production value. Meaning, you can blow up a whole city or a plane crash, and you can do any of that stuff, but a great nothing beats Jack Nicholson staring at you in The Shining, saying lines, and that's what Ethan meant by that. I never forgot that. Whenever I see actors do what they do, they really intimidate me. And yet when I'm on set, because it's my set, my movie, I have no problem somehow telling them what to do. In fact, Ian McKellen once said, can you give me, Bryan, could you possibly give me any other direction besides less theatrical? But every actor is different. Usual Suspects was a great training ground because every actor came from a different discipline. And X-Men is very similar. There's a lot of theater actors, but there are a lot of TV actors and some movie actors, or working with Tom Cruise is a completely different experience because Tom is a movie star, and then the actors I surrounded him with in Valkyrie are all, Royal Shakespeare Academy guys. So.
Your Superman Returns carried on some of the themes of the X-Men films in regards to the reluctant superhero. And the film also has the warmth, the humor, and the romance of the Richard Donner Superman film, especially the first and second film, which are elements totally missing from Man of Steel. You can't comment about that?
Well, they're very different films. I mean, the Superman Returns is very much a love song to the Richard Donner film. It's a sequel to what Richard Donner did, 25, many years ago. So it has the tonality and echoes that, from the casting of a guy who looks a lot like Chris Reeve, Brandon Routh, to the music. A movie like Man of Steel is very different. That's a sort of a reboot of the entire universe, a reconception of it. So naturally it would be, totally different, visually different, and but very impressive.
I think they would have tried to get, some charm in there,
I don't know. I think Henry Cavill's pretty charming. But that's just me. Actually, no, he's a good guy.
At what point are you going to direct a sequel to Superman Returns, and of course, the project wound up getting scuttled?
Yeah.
What would your sequel have?
Probably something similar to that, to Man of Steel, from something like that, something with a Zod character. We would have probably gone in that direction, some alien threat and some supervillain as opposed to Lex Luthor, who's a human villain. It probably would have definitely headed in that direction. But we just had a lot of trouble cracking the story, and I don't know how much excitement there was to continue with that at the studio level. And then I went and made Valkyrie, and that was that.
Speaking of Valkyrie, was there ever any studio resistance to casting Tom Cruise, even though he's a huge box office star? You don't think Tom Cruise, Nazi, German?
I know, that's weird. Well, he looks. I wouldn't have thought that either. When I first went to United Artists and Tom Cruise, who's running it, it was meant to be a small project, but we kept looking at the photographs of Stauffenberg, and he looks exactly like Tom, and he's the same energy, and he's a similar kind of character that I know Tom can play really well. But I really left it up to Tom. I put it on the table and I said, look at the book, look at the picture, what do you think? I mean, would you want to do this yourself? And he thought about it and agreed to do it. It wasn't a big process. He just needed to figure it out. And I'm happy because it made it a film. I mean, you make a film about a plot that no one knows about to kill Hitler that failed, and it makes like a couple $100 million. That's pretty amazing, and then you can't really do that without, Well, you can, I guess, but it's harder without Tom Cruise. And he's wonderful to work with. He's incredible to work with. It's an experience, very like nothing else. Like no. And I also had never worked with a movie star before. I've worked with people who become movie stars, but I have never actually worked with a movie star. Probably the most famous actor I ever worked with at that time when I started working with them was Patrick Stewart, and that was from Star Trek and television and the movie. So this was jumping right into a massive movie star who is also the owner of the studio, which is really weird. But he was great. He didn't pretend. He just he's very deferential to directors. He loves directors. And he loves to be directed.
Yeah, he's a long-time Star Trek fan. You mentioned Patrick Stewart. Have you ever been offered one of the Trek movies or had any interest in directing a Star Trek film?
Yeah, would have been interested at some point. But I've never been approached or met with Paramount about them that I can remember. No, I don't think so. It's tough. It's scary. I think I'm a bigger fan of Star Trek than JJ, and I think that's what makes JJ a better filmmaker for Star Trek than I would be. I wonder, because I might be such a big fan, I'll screw it up and be too precious. I don't know, but it's just so cool.
Well, you actually had a big part in one of the...
Yeah, I was in Star Trek 10. I'm 19 frames, don't blink. But I have a trading card, so that's pretty cool.
One of the biggest hits we ever had here at Fantasia was Michael Dougherty's Trick or Treat.
Oh yeah, I'm very proud of that.
Which you produced, of course, your production company, Bad Hat Harry. I was wondering, have you ever had any interest in directing a conventional horror film?
Yes, very much. Yeah, if I ever get a break in between the big movies or television pilots, which I also like to do, I would, if I can find the right piece of material, something with a bit of supernatural in it, I would love to direct a very suspenseful horror film. But my favorite films are not so much the slasher, but like movies that just, like, I don't know, well, Alien's probably a more expensive bad example, but The Exorcist or Sixth Sense, well, it's not horror, but anyway, you know what I mean. Those kind of movies.
Your last film, Jack the Giant Slayer, seems to have been creatively compromised. It seemed like you were seeking to make a more adult fairy tale movie, and it seemed like the studio might have been pushing it more towards kids. Was there
not really. I think tonally going into that movie, I knew the tone I was making, something between, an adventure, something between Ray Harryhausen with a touch of Princess Bride. So tonally, I was fine with it. The studio always, I think the studio didn't particularly do a great job distributing it, which I normally wouldn't complain about, but in this particular case, I have specific reasons why I feel that. But the intention was to sort of homage those kinds of films that I grew up with when I was very young. So, and I never, I wanted to work with fully rendered CG characters, size, and all that. And Nick was great to work with too, Nick Holt.
And you also worked with 3D for the first time. What was that experience like?
It was interesting. It does change your shooting style, and I found myself directing in 3D, so I'd have the glasses on, the two big monitors in front of me, and the only thing it affected was I didn't really give myself enough coverage. I wasn't shooting as much as I would normally. So I learned what shots work in 3D and what shots don't work as well. And now with X-Men Days of Future Past, I am shooting native 3D, I'm shooting in stereo, but on the set I only have my 2D monitors, my small normal 2D monitors that I always used to use. And I'm finding I'm just shooting more aggressively like that.
Before we continue our discussion on Days of Future Past, do you want to show the audience?
Oh yeah, you want to see like raw little footage?
Are you guys ready? Pull it off the market.
Yeah, and because I have to ask you, please. I mean, we have security spotters and night vision, all that, and they'll come and kill you. But I would ask, also out of respect, because this is special just for you guys, just we can keep it that way. So, don't just keep the phones in pockets.
No taking.
No taking. Be really. Yeah, should we get out of the way?
Yep.
So, oh, by the way, the movie's a year out. We have no visual effects, so this is just a little piece I got together to show some of the characters and some of the tones. So it's not, the movie's out.